first, just some introduction. What is the Citizens Utility Board, CUB? Who are we? And background to what is an integrated resource plan. It's kind of a mouthful. So what is this plan and why does it matter? What's the process that it goes through? As far as, who makes the decisions and on what grounds? And then dig into what Xcel is proposing and what CUB's analysis has found would be, in our opinion, a much better option for Xcel consumers. So we're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of where the electricity comes from and what the plan is for that over the next 15 years. And then there is an open, it's a comment period for public comment. So if any of you all are interested in making your voice heard, I want to make sure that you understand the different ways to do that, and you all feel prepared to make comments if you would like to do so. Does that sound good? All right. So the Citizens Utility Board, CUB, we're a nonprofit independent consumer advocate. We advocate for residential and small business utility customers in Minnesota. That means we work on electricity and natural gas issues, basically energy in general. And as I said, our office is in St. Paul. We have not been using it lately, but we work statewide. And so for us, what consumer advocacy means is really there's kind of two main things that we do. One is advocacy on a policy level. So topics like this at the Public Utilities Commission, it could be about getting clean energy for consumers. We also work on things that maybe you think of as a more traditional consumer advocate role, like consumer protections, utility shutoffs, bill payment options, and all of that. And we advocate at the legislature as well. So this picture is kind of showing what that looked like during times, testifying at the Capitol. And then here on the right-hand side is our senior regulatory advocate, Brian Edstrom, testifying to the Public Utilities Commission from his house. We are, especially at the legislature, we are usually the only group that is there whose mission is to be there on behalf of utility consumers. So we do our best to represent that perspective in all of the energy discussions going on. The other aspect of our work is our outreach program. And we will work with groups like this or individuals anywhere in Minnesota on the utility issues that are most relevant for them. A lot of the work that we do, and especially over the last year, has been making sure that everybody has essential utility service. Working one-on-one with folks who are behind on their bills, at risk of getting shut off or maybe already have been shut off, to make sure that people understand what resources are available to them, what their rights are, and also what their responsibilities are under the law, to make sure that they have service. What we also work on, we have one of our most popular services is our utility bill consultations. And we'll do like a bill clinic where we'll go set up with a host group and folks can come in, bring their bill. We'll talk to people for 20-30 minutes individually. And you leave with personalized suggestions for your family, your household, on how to move forward with your energy goals. Usually the top goal in mind for folks is reducing their bills. And on average, people save $150 a year from one of our consultations. But a lot of folks are also interested in reducing their environmental impacts. So we talk about, within your area, what renewable options are there, what are the pros and cons of the different options, and all of that. And we do presentations with groups on anything from a topic like this, which, a current policy topic and how it might affect you, to just, how do you read your bill and everything in between. All of our services are free. You or anybody that you know is welcome to call us anytime if you have any questions or concerns about anything related to your electricity or natural gas. Okay, so digging into Xcel Energy's 15-year electricity plan, also known as the Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP. So the first question is, what the heck is this thing and why should I care? So if we look at, here is basically, at least in the traditional model, this is what a utility does, an electric utility. And everything in Minnesota, at least everything from power generation to the transmission wires that carry that power down to the neighborhood level, to the distribution lines that run through a neighborhood right down to your home or business to provide that power. Traditionally, it's kind of a one-way flow. It goes from the power plant to the home. Now we know, of course, that maybe this home has solar panels on the roof and maybe it's flowing some power back to its neighbors or maybe back even onto the transmission network. But this is the basic picture of what an electric utility looks like. So a resource plan looks at how much power is going to be needed here at the customer level and where is it going to come from here at the generator level over the next 15 years. This is where Xcel's electricity comes from today. The largest source is nuclear, followed by gas and wind at about the same, about 20% each. And coal is down to 18%. And those three, gas, coal, and wind, have been changing very rapidly recently. So coal used to be a much, much larger percentage. It's been shrinking fast and it's going to continue to shrink. We'll talk about that. And it's getting replaced mainly with wind and gas, which are the lowest cost on a per unit of energy right now. But solar is also quickly coming in the mix. And so you can see solar energy there now at 3%. A few years ago, if you looked at this pie, you didn't even see a slice for solar. So that's growing really rapidly. Any questions before I keep going, or comments? All right, so this power system has a lot of effects on regular people, some of which are obvious, some of which are less so. I mean, the most obvious effect is that you have electricity, and when you turn your light switch on, it comes on. We all pay energy bills for that, and so the choices that the utility makes about where your power is going to come from have big implications for how much it's going to cost you, and unequal impacts across different populations. So unsurprisingly, lower income families have a much higher energy burden. There's also studies nationally that show that households of color, even controlling for income and housing type and many other things, pay a higher portion of their income on energy. So those are unequal effects. Another effect that it would have on Minnesotans is the opportunities to conserve energy or even generate your own energy and save money or even make a little bit of money off of that through utility programs. So Xcel and all utilities in the state offer conservation incentives. So rebates on efficient light bulbs and appliances. You can get a very deeply discounted energy audit, which is a great option for your home, that kind of a thing. You can put solar panels on your roof, or you can subscribe to a community solar garden. Those are all options for consumers. On the more negative side, of course, power generation, especially fossil fuel generation, has pollution, and we know that those effects are not felt equally either. So whether it's particulate or like criteria pollutants, or carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, and the effects of climate change and how those have felt across our communities. So what is Xcel's role in this? We kind of talked about that on the map. They own the stuff and they maintain it. So everything from the power plant or the wind turbine, either they own it or they have a contract with the company that does. And they own the electric wires, and it's their responsibility to make sure that you have power. The customers are the ones that pay for it. So all of Xcel's money comes from customers. Every dollar that they make in Minnesota comes from your bill. I saw something pop up in the chat. Yeah, I'd be happy to share the slides after this. Xcel and all electric utilities in Minnesota are also monopolies. So this is not the case in every state, but in Minnesota, utilities have monopoly service territories, and there are some very good reasons for that. But what it means is that who provides your electricity is determined just by where you live. You don't have the opportunity to switch if you don't like the service that they're providing. And Xcel is not then subject to the same kinds of market pressures that a normal business would. So in a normal business, if what they're selling is too expensive or it's not what you like, you take your money and you go buy that product somewhere else. You can't do that with electricity. And in its place, we have a regulatory model. So we have utility regulators whose job it is to ensure that Xcel is spending your money and making its decisions in line with the public interest. And it's their job to kind of determine what that public interest is. And it's a mix of all of the laws that the state has passed around utility regulations. So affordability, reliability, environmental impacts, but also allowing the utility to make to earn its recover its cost and make a reasonable return for its shareholders. Xcel is a for-profit company, and so the end of this, the deal is that they get a reasonable profit as well. And the folks that make these decisions are the Public Utilities Commission, or PUC. There are 5 members appointed by the governor, and you are looking at them right here. And it's their job to ensure that the utilities decisions are in line with the public interest. So they're the ones who are looking at, or will look at, Xcel's integrated resource plan, and will look at everything that parties or members of the public present about it and make a final decision about it. They basically get to tell Xcel what to do. And they have criteria very clearly laid out in Minnesota state rules that that show the guidelines for making a decision on an integrated resource plan. And it's these 5 things. It's reliability, affordability, the impacts, socioeconomic and environmental impacts that the plan will have. They want a plan that's going to allow the utility to be able to respond to changes and to minimize risks to the utility. So they want the plan that is, in their view, the best combination of all of those factors. So that might be something to keep in mind as we're going through the different elements of the plan. And if any of you are thinking about making public comments, that might help you understand where the commissioners, how the commissioners are going to be thinking about this.
So Annie, there are a couple of questions about the PUC.
Yeah.
Is it a full-time job, and how many staff support the PUC work, if you know that?
Yeah, it is a full-time job with a good salary, and they work very hard. We have our commissioners, I think all 5 of them take their job very seriously. Their staff, they must have, I would guess, 25 staff. I'm going to throw that number out there. If you actually go on the PUC's website, like if you Google Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, they have an organizational chart, and you can see they don't have so many staff people that they can't list them all on one PDF of an org chart for you, because you can see who they all are and what their roles are.
And hi, Annie, this is Janet. That was my question. So are those staff people, are they public employees? That, I mean, we pay them to oversee the utility companies in the state, is that right? I mean, the taxpayers pay them, is that right? Is that how it works?
They are public employees, government employees, and it looks like maybe one of them actually just joined, if Anne is on the line now. They are public employees. It's possible that some of the funding for the PUC also comes from utility, like assessments on utilities. And some of it comes from taxpayers. I couldn't tell you exactly how much is which, but basically whether it comes from your utility bill or your taxes, it's coming from the same person.
Yeah, it's okay. But yeah, it's a public, yeah.
Yeah, okay. They're state employees.
State employees. Got it. Thank you.
All right, so here is the kind of the timeline, the process that for the PUC to evaluate Xcel's integrated resource plan. This is a little bit abbreviated because this process actually got started in 2019, where Xcel filed its first plan, but then some of what it had assumed it was going to own a gas plant in Mankato. That didn't happen. That got denied, and so the PUC sent them back to revamp their plan a little bit and file a new one on June 30th of last year. And that really kicked off the process in earnest. So that was the plan that Xcel filed that we are all now reacting to. So that's kind of what starts the process, is a utility files its preferred plan, is what Xcel calls it. So here is all of our assumptions. Here's what we think is going to happen over the next 15 years. And here are the different electricity resources that we want to use to meet our customers' needs. And then everything at the PUC is a public process. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to everybody, but you can go on. They have an eDockets website and you can look at all of the materials in this case. So many groups have done so, like CUB, and we are formal intervening parties to this proceeding. All of us had a first round of comments due on February 11th, where we all filed our initial reactions to Xcel's plan. Many folks had alternative kind of changes to the plan, or in CUB's case, we did it entirely, an entire new kind of planning process ourselves, which I'll walk through. There are also parties that weighed in support of Xcel's plan. Any member of the public, like I said, is also welcome to make comments on this or any PUC proceeding. And those comments are currently being accepted in writing through April 12th. So anytime up until April 12th, you're welcome to make a comment. There has been a request for public meetings, but the PUC hasn't responded to that. So at this point, I don't think it's likely that will happen. The idea was you could either, over video, I would assume, or pre-recorded video, make a comment that way. But at this point, I'm assuming that's not likely to happen, but it is a possibility. So April 12th is the deadline for public comments. It's also the deadline for parties like CUB to file one more round of comments where we all respond to what everybody else said in the first round, and Xcel responds to all of us. And then assuming there are no extensions or further comment periods put on after this, sometimes the timelines do get extended, but assuming that doesn't happen, at some point after that, the PUC will schedule its hearing of the docket, and that will be a public meeting. Anybody is welcome to watch. If they're back in person, you can go to the PUC's office downtown St. Paul and watch it. Otherwise, you can just log on online and watch it. Actually, you can log on online and watch it whether they're in person or not. And at that meeting, the commissioners will ask whatever questions they have of all of the parties to make sure that they fully understand inside and out where everybody is coming from and all the evidence on the record. The public doesn't typically have an opportunity to speak at these meetings. It's just an opportunity to watch unless you're a formal party to the docket. That meeting could last one day, or I would suspect it, for a case like this, it might last multiple days. And then at the end of it, after commissioners have asked all their questions of parties, they'll kind of switch gears and go into what they call their deliberations, where they will talk it over with each other through all of the different options that they have and all the decisions that they need to make in the plan. And they'll take votes and make their final decision. And so at the end of it, they'll approve Xcel's integrated resource plan. It could, they could approve everything that Xcel proposed. They could approve everything that a party like CUB proposed, but most likely they'll take pieces of Xcel's proposal and pieces of what other parties have brought and kind of put them together. Does that make sense? All right. So when CUB approached the IRP, we asked what is a pretty simple question, but a pretty complicated answer. So what we are looking for is the resource plan that is the best for Xcel consumers. And by that, we thought the cleanest and the least expensive option, and that's the most in the consumer interest. So that's the lens that we were using to evaluate Xcel's plan and to look for alternatives. Like I said, it's easy to ask, but it's actually really complicated to answer in reality. And so we put together a team That includes not just our staff, but also consulting experts on the national level to help us do this analysis. A resource plan involves this really complicated utility system modeling, and there are people that is what they do. They're modelers for utilities. We worked with Vibrant Clean Energy, VCE, out of Colorado. They have their own modeling platform that they use that models not just Xcel's territory, but they look at the whole mid-continent electric grid. So they understand everything that's going on that system. I'll talk more about kind of what the model does. And that was conducted by Vibrant Clean Energy. And we also had technical support from an organization called Grid Lab. They're out of California. And legal representation from the firm of Keys and Fox, also out of Colorado. So this is what the main reason I put this up there is to kind of demonstrate what it takes to be an intervener on a case like this. It's a big lift. So we're very fortunate at CUB this time to have the resources to put together really a fantastic team. I'm really pleased with the team that we have. But it's really difficult for any organization, but especially one on the smaller side with limited resources to do. So digging in, there is a lot to like about Xcel's plan. Xcel was the first major utility in the country to say that it's going 100% carbon free. They say they're going to do that by 2050. That's really important, and it was, I think, a really bold step, and they deserve a lot of credit for doing that, and especially to be the first out the gate. You know, I just want to commend Xcel for taking that step. I do have a little asterisk on here, and that asterisk represents a new fossil fuel power plant that Xcel wants to build, which I'll talk more about. Xcel plans to close all of its coal plants ahead of schedule, which is good not only for carbon and pollution, but also that's some of the most expensive power on the system today. And so the longer, I mean, the sooner Xcel can transition from coal power to something else, the more customers are going to save. Or the other way to look at that is the longer that we're depending on coal power, the more we're paying too much for electricity. So it's great that they're going to transition off of those plants. They're adding substantial amounts of wind and solar, and they have pretty robust energy efficiency targets to help their consumers be more efficient and conserve energy. I think probably the highest a Minnesota utility has ever put in a resource plan. So it's all really good. See a couple questions in the chat. Jennifer, when you consider the most cost-effective for consumers, what time period do you look at? I.e., if costs for one energy source are expected to go down but aren't the cheapest currently, how are those costs integrated? So we use projections of what the costs for different electricity sources will be. So we don't just look 15 years ahead and assume that solar power is going to cost what it costs today, or battery power. You know, those things are changing very rapidly. And there are various projections out there, but the ones that we use are from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory under DOE. Jennifer, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and my question kind of relates to the, the new gas plant, and how that's sort of being figured in, because that's a longer term, as is, as solar comes down and wind is, one of the most cost effective. Yeah, it was just because I know one of the questions we have is, and that people have raised is, why is there consideration for new gas plants? So that's kind of where that question is coming from. And so, if we're looking at kind of time value of money and costs, what costs are today, and then those projections for gas, solar, wind, et cetera, over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years to 2050, because all, infrastructure, that's long-term planning. So I was just curious.
Yeah. You've put your finger on a really important piece of this, and something that's going to be a lot of debate. if you don't mind holding that thought, we're going to talk about it specifically as it relates to the gas plant and
Yeah, sounds good.
what our
Thanks.
findings are. Okay, and then we'll see if that addresses what you're thinking. Don and Bill, just curious if there are local resources to help with the studies and why you went with national consultants. There aren't a lot of local folks that do this kind of thing. There are, like a handful of people across the country that do utility resource plan modeling, and they do it all over the place. So I'm actually not aware of any group that has like that any of the other interveners that are participating in the Xcel IRP that have a modeler who is local, aside from the utility themselves. I'm not aware of anybody like at the university or anywhere that does this kind of planning. Okay, so I said there's a lot to like about Xcel's plan, but we think that it can also be a lot better. So just starting kind of with the bottom line, CUB's plan, we call the consumer's plan. It is far and away less expensive than Xcel's plan. It saves by 2035, it's saving $1 billion per year. And those are the costs that have to be collected from ratepayers. So Xcel has to charge its customers $1 billion less every year under the consumer's plan than under Xcel's plan. To put that in perspective, it's kind of hard to imagine what $1 billion means to a company like Xcel, but our calculation is that it could reduce electricity rates by more than a third. So that's a really, really large impact on customers. It also reduces carbon faster and farther than Xcel's plan does. Xcel said ours reduces electricity emissions, so emissions from Xcel's operation, by 86% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. Xcel says it reduces its emissions by 81%, but there is some fudging in that where they have a fair number of resources that they say, sometime in the future this could be met with some advanced technology, but we're not committed to anything for now, and we're modeling it as natural gas plants, but kind of leaving the decision for later. So they say, for now, we'll consider it as natural gas, but they don't include any emissions from that. So there's a fair amount of uncertainty in Xcel's 81%. Ours says we found a way to get to 86% carbon reduction with technology that is commercially viable right now. And beyond that, we also look at the broader economy and the opportunities for using clean electricity to replace fossil fuels for transportation and heating of buildings and water. And in doing so, that reduces emissions in the total economy in Xcel's area by 45% by 2035.
And Annie, hi, it's Janet. What is Xcel's area? Are we talking Xcel's area in Minnesota? Because of course they're in multiple states.
Just in Minnesota, yeah.
Okay. And that's sort of the southern third of the state or so, or
it's a patchwork. So it's like the Twin Cities, Red Wing, Winona areas. There's some around the Rochester area, but not Rochester itself. St. Cloud, there's some, but anywhere you're getting into the more rural areas, Xcel doesn't have those service territories, and some of the cities, Rochester would be the biggest one, but some of the smaller cities have their own municipal utilities too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird map.
Yeah, definitely a patchwork. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. The consumer's plan also reduces financial risk. So as Jennifer was saying, Xcel is proposing to build a new natural gas power plant. We see that as a very risky investment for all the reasons that she laid out and some more. And if it needs the plant, if the system's not going to be reliable without it, or if it's going to get too expensive without it, then the way we approach it is if it needs it, it needs it. But if there's a way to avoid that that risk as well as those emissions, then so much the better. And we found that you can. Don and Bill, we advocate for all of Minnesota, not just Xcel consumers. Okay, so that was kind of the top line results of our plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got there and the different choices that we made from Xcel's plan that made the difference in the results. So one is, and this is a function of the model that we used. It's able to consider not just those traditional big power plant, what's called utility scale generation, but also consider what is sited close to customers and maybe even owned by customers as a resource for the full grid. So things like rooftop solar and batteries, which will soon be a lot more prominent on the neighborhood level, on what's called the distribution system. So that's anything that's connected to those regular old power lines that you see in your neighborhood. Xcel just kind of makes some assumptions about what they think like rooftop solar adoption will be and community solar adoption will be, and they just kind of put that into their model. It's not something that you know, everything else in the model determines what's the most cost effective and what are the best choices. The computer runs those calculations and spits out the optimal results. But distributed solar, rooftop solar, community solar, those aren't among those, in storage either, I don't believe. On ours it is. So our analysis was able to look at the full system and say, you know, when those large scale resources are the most cost-effective choice, then our model builds those. And when the small scale resources close to load, close to where the customers are, when those are the most cost-effective choice, then our model builds those. And we did not go in looking for a result that was going to have a lot of distributed solar in it. And I, just to be honest, was really surprised at how much came out of it. So there is really a really substantial amount of solar power sited on the distribution system that is the most cost-effective choice for the whole system. And that could be something as small as development on somebody's house, or it could be much larger things, but the important thing in this consideration is that it's sited on the distribution system. And as I mentioned, we also have some amount of battery storage on the distribution system as well, and that helps to kind of weather the daily kind of peaks and valleys in electricity demand and electricity generation, especially as we're going to more variable wind and solar resources. Excuse me. Minnesota solar gardens don't look like that. That is not a solar garden, community solar garden, and I don't believe that is from Minnesota, sorry. What does the plan assume about increases in technology for battery storage? So that was another projections that we took from the National Renewable Energy Lab. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head precisely what the projections are, but we do, you know, we project that the costs are going to come down. I think as a reasonable projection. Any other comments or questions on this topic? All right. Another difference between, oh, let me just go back to the chat here. Are there community scale battery storage facilities in the area? There are starting to be some. So Connexus Energy, which is a cooperative that serves kind of the northern suburbs, Blaine, Anoka area, they have put on, gosh, I'm going to get the size wrong, something like a 20 megawatt system. That might, don't quote me on that, but a fairly substantially sized battery storage system. It's not enormous. It's not like power plant scale by any means, but I would say community scale. And it's helping them with exactly what I talked about. So it helps them reduce their peak demands on the utility, which is the most expensive time for the utility. They serve, they're a cooperative utility that serves, like I said, that area, northwest suburbs region of the Twin Cities. Is it just an old myth that you can't satisfy all energy needs using sun and wind? That is kind of the key question that these plans look at. It's certainly not a myth that it's not easy. I don't think anyone would say it's simple to serve all energy needs using sun and wind. You certainly can. I mean, you can build a ton of solar and a ton of wind power and a ton of batteries. And you also have the regional grid that we're a part of that helps to spread the variability across a big region. So it's definitely possible. And the question is just, how do you get to something that is cost effective, and how close to 100% can you get right now, and how fast? So there's no question that we can, I don't think it's a stretch to get to, well, our plan gets to like 89% clean energy by 2035. So very doable. It's that last 5 or 10% where things get a little bit difficult, but we're not there yet. I think we have a long way to go and a lot of progress that we know we can be making right now to get there. So I mentioned that coal is expensive. Xcel is closing all of its coal plants in Minnesota, are proposing to do so by 2030. We suggest that they do it even earlier. So in our plan, they all close by 2025. And like I said, that there's substantial savings in doing so. Does Xcel have local energy storage plans? They really don't have anything in their plan related to batteries. I'm not sure if they have, I want to say they don't have any at all. It's possible they have like a very minimal amount, but it's really not a part of their plan in Minnesota. Michael, that 89% that I quoted noted, yes, I do believe it does include nuclear. I can double check on that. We do include, Xcel has 2 nuclear plants, and we do recommend that they stay online. So yeah, I might have misspoken about whether that was renewable or carbon-free energy, but I can double check that. Thank you for that question. Another thing that our plan does adds a lot of wind power. So Xcel adds some, we recommend adding about twice as much as what they say. Wind is the cheapest on a like a per megawatt basis, per unit of energy. Wind is the cheapest power that there is, especially in the Midwest where it's very windy. And so the more of that you can integrate on your system, the more, basically more cheap energy you're getting. And we also bring it online sooner than Xcel in its plan. How much smart grid infrastructure is appropriated for? Okay, that's a really good question. You guys really know a lot about this utility planning. So that Xcel's investments in smart grid, that's kind of that's not a part of the resource plan, just because of the way that kind of like these lines are drawn at the PUC as to what's in which planning process. They have a separate process. This is integrated resource planning. They have a separate process on integrated distribution planning that we also were a party to a proceeding last year, and that's still kind of carrying forward. And Xcel is making really substantial investments in its distribution infrastructure and smart grid. So they are planning on putting replacing everybody's meter with smart meters, for example, within the next couple of years. So that's a big investment. It also, those meters need to have a communications network because they have fancy technology that can have two-way communications, and it needs to have the kind of the communications network to be able to make use of that. It needs back-end software and other things along those lines. So we're talking like something on the level of like $600 million of investment just in the meters and the enabling technologies for the meters. That's a lot of money, and it can make sense to do that because there's a lot of really beneficial things that those meters can enable, as far as using the grid more efficiently, integrating more distributed solar, for example, the data that it can provide to consumers and to groups like us to understand how to get more cost effectiveness out of the grid and more emissions reductions out of the grid. So they can do a lot of really cool things. The question is just making sure that those things happen. So that's another argument that we have brought forward in this case is Xcel is making these grid investments, and it should be taking advantage of them. And that means leaning more on the distribution system, leaning more on those local resources because they're now more available. And so that, you know, let's get the benefits of distributed solar and electrification, which we'll talk about, and distributed batteries. But what, in my view, what Xcel has put forward is kind of a very traditional looking resource plan, which relies almost entirely on those big kind of generation that's sited out there. It's not coal plants anymore. There is a gas plant. There's utility scale wind, which is good, and utility scale solar, which is good. But that shouldn't be the only resources that an Xcel thinks about using. To get customers their money's worth out of these grid investments, they need to be using them. So I mentioned beneficial electrification. So that is when you can switch from using fossil fuels to using electricity, and it both saves money for the consumer and reduces emissions. At least that's how I would define beneficial electrification. And there are a lot of opportunities for that, and it's quickly growing opportunities as the prices in these technologies come down. And the electricity sector is already cleaner than fossil fuels for most of these end uses, and it is rapidly becoming cleaner. So electric vehicles are the most well-known opportunity. There are many opportunities for, you know, many types of people where it makes financial sense to buy an electric vehicle now. And the prices on those cars are coming down. It is not a good option for everybody. I wouldn't say that it was. I tried to buy one myself last time I bought a car, and it just didn't work out for my family. But I am very optimistic that soon it will, because there's a lot more options coming out and the prices are coming down. And so those, you know, the number of electric vehicles is really taking off. The two other things that we see on this slide, all the way on the right, that is an air source heat pump that can provide both heating and cooling to a home. So it looks kind of like an AC, like central air. There's also kind of wall units that you could buy depending on if you have your house is ducted or some other characteristics. I do have this in my house. Mine looks a lot more like a regular central air conditioner than the one in the picture. In the summer, it runs just like an air conditioner. In the winter, it just runs in reverse. And instead of drawing heat out of the home and dumping it outside, it draws heat out of the outside and dumps it in the home. And the new heat pumps can run down to very, very cold temperatures, even below 0. They can still be finding heat in the air depending on what type of the heat pump that you have. It won't be your only heating source in Minnesota. It's not going to keep your house warm at 20 below, so you need to have a backup. But it can provide a good amount of the heating and all of the cooling for a home. Right now, they're cost effective. Kind of a general rule of thumb is if you heat your home with propane or fuel oil, the delivered fuel like that, a heat pump can make financial sense. If you heat with natural gas, it's not going to pencil out just on the economics alone. Some folks do like to put them in because of the environmental benefits of using clean energy, and so that's a personal choice. But they're really coming, and in some states, like especially like in the Northeast, I know they're a lot more popular. I'm from Maine, and heat pumps are really common out there now, and so that's a very similar climate to we have in Minnesota, and they're definitely coming here as well. The appliance in the middle, it takes the heat pump technology and applies it to water heating. So that's an electric heat pump water heater, sometimes called a hybrid electric water heater. It basically uses that same heat pump technology, which is very efficient and uses it to heat water. So a typical electric water heater is not going to be a very efficient appliance, but an electric heat pump water is, and they can be very cost effective as well. So we, our consumers plan integrates some pretty robust assumptions about these technology adoption. And there's a few benefits in doing that. One, it's a cost saving for the individual customer in a lot of circumstances. So it just makes financial sense on an individual level. Two, it reduces emissions economy-wide. So an electric vehicle is going to have far less pollution, far less greenhouse gas impact than a gasoline vehicle. But one of the most important things as we're looking at this from the utility planning perspective and from the utility consumer perspective is that these kinds of technologies can reduce costs for everybody on the whole system. So whether or not you are driving an EV or you have a heat pump on your home, if your neighbors do, that can help bring the cost down for you as well. And it does that because it's increasing the electricity load. So all of like the fixed costs of the utility get to be spread over more kilowatt hour sales, more units of electricity sold. And that's going to bring that rate per kilowatt hour down. But even more than that, these types of loads are really flexible. So if you look at an EV, typically you will come home at some point, probably maybe you drive home from work, plug in your car when you get home, and then at some point go to bed, wake up the next morning and drive away. And you want it to be charged when you're ready to leave, but you don't care if it charges at 11 p.m. or 2 a.m. as long as it's at 100% by 7. And that means that the utility can use that and kind of cycle those electric vehicles on and off to match, say there's a lot of wind blowing at night, but not quite enough to power all of the EVs all at once. They can look at all of the EVs onto their system and charge some of them at some times and some of them at other times, as long as they're all charged by when the consumer needs it. And those are programs that exist today that people can opt into. They're not mandatory, but there's some discounted electricity for the customer in that, and it helps the utility manage its system and integrate a lot more of that variable renewable power. So we've talked about how wind is the cheapest energy that's available, and that the more that the utility can use of it, the less that their energy costs are going to be. And so actually technologies like this, and the same goes with the heating technologies, those can be cycled on and off as well, and are. My heat pump is on a program like that in my utility. All of these things help Xcel or help a utility integrate more of that variable wind and solar power. Does that make sense? Is there any money in the relief bill that was passed today that will go toward renewable infrastructure? I do not know the answer to that. I know that there's money for energy assistance, so that's really good. So I'm excited to see that, but I need to kind of dig in. We don't work really don't work on the federal level, so I need to catch up kind of along with the rest of you about what all is in that massive bill that was passed today in Congress. right, I think I'm gonna just go quickly here because I think I'm running a little bit over time. So we talked about the gas plant. Xcel wants to build a new natural gas power plant at the Sherburne County Generating Station, or Sherco, where they're retiring a coal plant. If they need it, they need it, I said, but it's very risky. So Xcel has said they're going to be carbon free by 2050. Typically, you need 30 to 40 years of running a plant like this to pay it off. Clearly, this plant is not going to be running in its proposed form in 2050 if Xcel says it's not going to be emitting any carbon in 2050. So there's going to be a significant balance that still needs to be paid off by that time. There's legislation in the Minnesota House that would require Xcel to be carbon free by 2040. It's not going to pass this year, but it's, I think, very likely that sometime between now and when this plant would be paid off in, say, around 2060, there's going to be more carbon regulation. I think that's, it would be silly to think otherwise. But also, as was said earlier, the cost of renewables and the cost of storage is coming down rapidly and is continuing to come down. It's very likely that this plant is no longer going to make financial sense to operate within its lifetime. There was a study done by the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is another national kind of a energy think tank, I guess I would call it, that said that as of when the report was done a year or two ago, 90% of the gas plants that were being built at that time would not be cost effective for their whole lifetime. And what that means is they should close down early to save everybody money, but then somebody is going to be left with a big stranded cost that needs to be paid off. And that's not a good situation. I mean, basically that typically goes to ratepayers. The other option is that the shareholders of our company have to eat that cost, but that's very rare. So we see this as not only a climate risk, but also a major financial risk for Xcel's customers and want to avoid it. And our analysis showed that you can have a system that is completely reliable. We modeled every 5-minute interval over 20 years, including projections of weather data and making sure that this system was going to be reliable with a buffer, room for error, and it is. And it's affordable. As I said, it's actually far less expensive than what Xcel's plan is. So we're arguing very strongly that this plant is not needed. The PUC is supposed to protect us from these kinds of costs. So that is the argument we're putting to them. The complicated factor in this particular plant is that Xcel was able to pass 4 years ago at the legislature a law that basically, at least the way that Xcel reads it, gives them permission to build the plant. However, what it doesn't do is give them permission to recover all of the costs from their customers. So what we are saying to the PUC is, if Xcel builds this and it ends up being a bad investment, ended up as a stranded asset, put them on notice today that they're on the hook for those costs. And that's going to look, all of a sudden, if the risk is on the shareholders instead of on the ratepayers, it's going to make Xcel think twice about actually building the plant. Okay, if you are interested in making a comment on this plan, comments are being accepted by the PUC through April 12th at 4:30 p.m. There are many ways to do this. One easy way is to go to CUB's website, cubminnesota.org. The first big banner you see on our homepage, takes you to the Consumers Plan. Click on that. And there's a form there that allows you to make a comment. We have some sample text that you can use, but would very much encourage you to make it your own. You can also send an email, mail, you can fax, you can call the PUC, you can contact them directly. Just make sure to include that docket number 19-368, and so staff knows the right place to put your comment. And keep in mind that everything is public, so anything you say in a public comment becomes a part of the public record for anyone else to see. That includes, you have to include your name, but if you add, your address or any other personally identifying information, that's just be aware that that's going to end up in a public record. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to stay and talk about this as long as you would like. I know you have a lot of other stuff on your agenda, so I want to be respectful of your time. If you are interested in more information about CUB or the Consumers Plan, it's all on our website. You can read the whole thing. You can sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch. And if you appreciate what we do, we'd very much appreciate a donation, a contribution. We are a nonprofit and depend on the support of folks like yourselves. I see one more question in the chat. What was the purpose of legislation allowing them to build? What is the benefit to them of considering the alternatives? I don't think it was good legislation, so you're not going to find a defense of that bill here. We oppose it quite strongly. In the end, we did formally drop our opposition because we were able to negotiate with Xcel to get that language in about cost recovery. So because of negotiation with CUB and actually large industrial customers, that's why there is that language that says Xcel has to get the cost recovery approved. So yeah, it's not good legislation. Those kinds of decisions need to be made at the PUC where you can actually look at the pros and cons and the other alternatives.
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean,
yeah,
they went through the trouble of, putting through their legislation and convincing others. So what was the motivation? That presumably financial for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. There is a financial interest for Xcel. They make a return on investment from capital investments that they make. So that is where the utilities profit comes from, mainly. A major source of it is they have an approved rate of return on equity, and that gets applied to a capital investment. So right now, Xcel has an approved ROE of just over 9%. And so the Public Utilities Commission sets rates that they expect will allow Xcel to make a 9% return on a big investment like a gas plant. I mean, that applies also to if they own a solar facility or a wind farm, that's the same, or meters, on your home. So there are certainly other ways for Xcel to make a profit and to be a healthy business from a financial perspective that don't involve building a gas plant. And we are hoping that they will be open to discussing those.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Janet, for your comment.
I'm sorry, Sarah, one more. Just, you said that there are other ways to make money. Like what? Like wind, on solar, facilities, farms, arrays. What else? What else?
Well, those are two great ones, and they're actually more capital intensive than a gas plant, because like 100% of the cost of generating power from wind and solar is the capital asset itself. It's like the wind turbine. You don't have any fuel that you have to buy. So a gas plant, you have to run it with fuel. A lot of the cost of running of getting gas power is the gas, and Xcel doesn't make a profit on the gas. So renewables are a really great way for them to make money if you're looking at it from that perspective. Okay. The grid investments would be another category. They can apply their ROE to grid investments too.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thanks. Yes, thanks for your work. It's exciting to have this alternative plan going in, and to hear maybe, I mean, I know there are a couple alternative plans from other groups too. I don't think any of them include a new gas plant. And so it'll be interesting to see what the discussion at the PUC is.
Andy, this is Michael. I have a general question. So we know about a lot of the externalities. We know about the externalities of carbon production. We know about the externalities of nuclear. Wind, even if it's the cheapest source, there are impacts on birds, and some people are affected by the vibrations and shadows and those kind of things. Are there those kind of externalities with solar power, large scale solar power, especially?
Yeah, I mean, there's no source of electricity that doesn't have any consequences. So there is talk about, where the materials to build solar panels come from and kind of the supply chain there. And those are real issues. They're also, I think, being used as a convenient way to oppose renewable power. So I don't want to say they're not real issues. They really are, and they're being the industry is wrestling with those. Locally, there's perceptions of changes to rural rural character. So folks who are used to being surrounded by farms, for example, and being surrounded by solar panels, that is a real change for people. I'm sure there are kind of like local environmental effects, but nothing on the scale of what it would be from fossil fuel generation.
I'm not so sure about that, Annie. I think that local solar gardens, especially in Washington County, take up quite a bit of farm space. And I think that it can be a valuable asset if it includes pollinator habitat. So how can you speak to this? Because there's also a habitat, there's also a handoff between the local developers and ownership to Xcel Energy. Can you speak to that and how that works?
Yeah, so a developer that has a community solar garden that's a part of Xcel's community solar program, those are owned by the developer. Xcel buys the power from them, but they don't take over ownership of the facility itself. So they don't have a lot of say as to how those are, what those developments look like. Subscribers do, because that is one area where you can, if you want to subscribe to a solar garden, you can pick the one that you want. And if you don't, if you don't want one that doesn't have pollinator friendly habitat and say like permeable soils and that kind of thing, you don't need to subscribe to it. There are some standards around pollinator friendly, I can't remember the term, but basically like solar, what goes into a solar development that's pollinator friendly. Those are voluntary, but there are standards that you can look at to and someone can say, yes, we meet that. And that is really great. You can integrate it into like farmlands and that kind of thing too.
Right. So that's really fabulous in Washington County. How does that speak to Ramsey County and our local habitats and our local experiences?
I guess I'm not familiar if there's something on the county level that Washington County has done, like a county requirement or something. Is there something like that in Washington County?
No, I'm just thinking about what I've seen and talked to for farmers and installations. So I'm curious about Ramsey County though, and where in Ramsey County we see this and how that speaks to our availability as urban subscribers and how you're facilitating that.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Ramsey County being more of an urban environment than much of Washington County, so more of the opportunity for solar is going to be rooftop solar, big buildings, maybe even parking garages, that kind of thing. And there are things that the city can do and probably is looking into as part of its climate plan. I'm not real familiar with either Ramsey County or the city of St. Paul's climate plans, but they probably incorporate that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Highland Bridge, the one, that's been in the paper anyway, is the new, the development on the Ford site is, Ryan is planning a solar array, and I'm not sure, other people may know more than me if it's on the ground or it's on top of buildings, I'm not sure, but they're not big solar gardens at all in St. Paul. I don't think there are any currently. And I don't know about Ramsey County either. But I mean, I don't know of any in Ramsey County. Maybe there are, I just don't know. But there aren't any in St. Paul except that planned one, I believe. That's a problem. We need to do that. Some people are trying to get that solar installations on the schools, for instance. But yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much, Annie, for joining us again, and just for your work and your organization's work on this plan.
Annie, I just had one more question. Actually, is there any plan or is there anything in the plan that includes geothermal or some other sources? We've talked about solar and wind, but is there anything in the plan about geothermal?
Not specifically. I would say geothermal can be a good source. So we talked about air source heat pumps. There are ground source heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps too.
Yep.
And those they don't make financial sense for like something the size of a house, but for a larger building they can. So that could be an option for big buildings. It's not one that we really looked into, so it's not in our plan, but that's something to look at. It's as far as like geothermal systems that pull out really hot water, like maybe they have in the West and use it for power generation or something. That geologically Minnesota is not set up for that, so that's not an option here. It'd be great in something like Yellowstone or somewhere where there's hot temperatures closer to the surface, but we don't have that here.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm also noticing that Jim has a question in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Pioneer Press had an article about the polar plunge in Texas. Seems to suggest we'll be getting big bills to pay for purchase energy on the spot market when energy demand was great. Yeah, that is a big issue right now. And to my knowledge so far, at least I haven't heard anything that suggests that Xcel electricity is affected or at any substantial amount by that. But the gas, Xcel gas and CenterPoint gas, if anyone here is a CenterPoint customer, there are some really substantial costs. So they're kind of like ballpark estimates without having big numbers, where that just over that short period of the polar vortex hitting Texas, the utilities spent something like an extra $200 to $400 per residential customer on gas. That's like enormous amount of money. And so now the question is, well, there's multiple questions. At the federal level, I'm hoping there's going to be some investigation into price gouging because somebody got rich off of that, and that's not right. That's not really the state's issue to solve. So at the state level, the assumption is the costs that the utility paid are the costs for now, and those need to be covered in some way. And most likely it's going to be, typically those would be applied over 12 months to a customer. So you don't pay it all at once, but even so, that's a really substantial cost. And so spreading that out over a longer period is an option. I know the legislature, I've been working with legislators on some assistance for low-income families, low-income households, and some other options. But the PUC opened an investigation into that with a long list of questions that they want the utilities to answer, and they're gonna look into both what to do with the costs and also how to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Great. Any other? Oh, sorry, Jim, do you want to?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much, and I'm sorry for taking more time than had been planned. Thank you for sharing your meeting with me.
Oh, that's good.
Feel free to follow up with me if you have more questions or comments. I'll put my contact information in the chat here, and I will make sure to send the PDF of these slides around too.